Good to see everybody this morning. We're a little bit behind, so we're going to have to speed through some stuff. But we're still in John chapter 6, and still in this discussion about the bread of life, having gone through, fed the 5,000, the struggle that the Jews are having at this time. But as we go further into this chapter, we're going to find out that it's not just these Jewish people that are following Jesus from place to place that are having problems. It's going to be those that are close to Jesus as well. And that while we're viewing this and we're thinking about it from the aspect of, okay, what Jesus is doing and what he's performed, they've already known about from their history. And that we've been discussing this from the standpoint of a history of wanderers. Now we're going to start with more of that history of wandering in the wilderness, but particularly that of the murmuring and the complaining that took place then is going to be taking place once again with this crowd. So last week we wrapped things up, John 6:36, but I said unto you that ye also have seen me and believe not. All that the Father giveth me shall come to me, and him that cometh to me I will in no wise cast out. For I came down from heaven not to do mine own will, but the will of him that sent me. And this is the Father's will which hath sent me, that of all which he hath given me I should lose nothing, but should raise it up again at the last day. And this is the will of him that sent me, that every one which seeth the Son and believeth on him may have everlasting life, and I will raise him up at the last day. So here's all of this discussion and all of this explanation as to what the miracle was meant to show them. You remember, Jesus accuses them, you're following me not because you saw the miracle, but because you ate bread. And it's like, well, hold on a minute. I thought that was the miracle, was that you gave us bread to eat. And it's, no, you're not comprehending. You're not understanding. You're not piecing these things together. So all of this, once again, building the foundation or building upon the foundation that's been laid, that Jesus is not just a mortal man. He is in fact deity. He is the Son of God. He is the Word that was made flesh. He was in heaven. He came down from heaven. And that so as to exemplify to the rest of us of what it means to do the Father's will and to live a life that is pleasing to the Father's desire. And that with all of this, you have verse 39, this is the Father's will which hath sent me, that of all which he hath given me I should lose nothing, but should raise it up again at the last day. So that once again is that eternal life element in this. That even if you're going to die physically, you are still going to live. So that you put all these wills together, and we're getting that understanding. But then we have verse 41, that while we look at this crowd, and we might, shake our finger and say about them, shame on them for what's going to happen next, what they exemplify and what they do is a problem that we still have today. And that's going to be with the complaining that they're going to end up doing. And that this complaining is coming after all of this explanation, and that it's, well, we're really not wanting what it is that you're offering. The Jews then murmured at him because he said, I am the bread which came down from heaven. So just like they complained about the manna in the Old Testament, here are their great grandchildren, and they're behaving just like their fathers did. Complaining, murmuring, just as they did. And do we remember specifically what it was that they said in their complaining about the manna?
Is it we had something better?
That's in there. Okay. You guys hear? Okay. Our souls do loathe this light bread. And that's from Numbers 21 and verse 5. Now, can you just imagine that? That's how you're going to behave? You're being led by God, and you don't even have to go out and sow seed, tend to the seed, harvest the wheat, and then go through all the processes of turning that into bread. Bread just shows up every morning. And your attitude is going to be, I'm just tired of this. It's not even a thing of being tired of it. I hate this. And that's what they... Huh? You're right, yeah. And so, that's what they said about the bread in the wilderness. What do you think they're saying about the bread that's in front of them now? That's what they're saying about Jesus. We loathe this bread. And it was such an attitude that was so perversive and prevalent and overcoming of the multitude that Moses warned the next generation about this very problem. And that's the section that we read last week from Deuteronomy chapter 8, verses 1 through about verse 10. We didn't read all of that last time. I think we read 1 through 5 last time, just in discussion about man shall not live by bread alone. But Deuteronomy 8 is the foundation of what is laid out in front of us right here. And that here they were complaining about those provisions that God made, and now their ancestors are doing the exact same thing. Jesus says, I'm the bread of life that you'll come and eat, you'll live. You'll live eternally. You would think people would be running over each other to get at that. But instead, here's the response. They're murmuring. And this isn't going to be the end of it. They're going to continue to go about this. And in their murmuring, here's what they end up trying to do. So they murmur because he said, I'm the bread which came down from heaven. And they're going to try to find a way to refute that. Well, how can we disprove that he actually came from heaven? And they come up with this weak argument in verse 42. And they said, is not this Jesus, the son of Joseph, whose father and mother we know? How is it then that he saith, I come down from heaven? Go for it.
It just reminds me of everything that goes on with us. It's like, well, you're just trying to attack the person. You're not making actual arguments. It's like, well, what can I think of? It's the woman calling you a racist. She can't think of anything else to say except for, you're a racist, Micah, because you're standing up for people. And it's like, you have to go so low as to find, well, this is just the carpenter. We know their parents. He's nothing special. It's like, okay, what does that have to do with what's going on right now? Just, not only is it the great-great-great-great-great-grandchildren here, but it comes to America, the great-great-great-great-grandchildren here. It's like it just follows, no matter where Christianity goes, these people follow, and it's amazing.
And it all just comes back to have like this dissatisfaction with what God says. Here's what God says, here's what God provides. I don't like that. Seriously? Really? But here's what they come up with. Oh, we know you. And it made no difference that Jesus took 5 loaves and 2 fishes and fed a multitude. Here's what they automatically fall back on. We're going to discredit you. We're going to try to find some way to ruin your reputation. And the only thing they can come up with, isn't this Joseph's son? But what does everybody know about Jesus?
That his father is not Joseph.
Okay. He was born of a virgin. Everybody knows this. So that even when they're making this accusation, it's like, you know this isn't right. You know this isn't true. And they're going to do the exact same thing in the very next chapter when Jesus goes up to Jerusalem for another feast. And they try to raise a question about where he was born. And Well, not quite. They try, well now that you've said that, you've messed me up. Okay, hold on.
Dead air.
Yeah, dead air. I just read it. Maybe it's not the next chapter. Yeah, it is. Okay.
27.
Yeah. Yeah, so verse 27 of chapter 7, howbeit we know this man whence he is, but when Christ cometh, no man knoweth whence he is. Then cried Jesus in the temple, and as he taught, saying, Ye both know me, and ye know whence I am, and I am not come of myself, but he that sent me is true, whom ye know not. So here they go. Now, isn't that the same tactic that everybody tries to play when they don't want to give an answer? Well, we just don't know. Just can't tell. We don't have a standard. Blah, 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 this, that, and the other. Who are you fooling? And also considering that here they are in John chapter 7, and they're saying, yeah, we don't know from whence the Messiah is going to come. But that's a flat-out contradiction from what they tell Herod in Matthew chapter 2. Matthew chapter 2, the wise men come from the east, and they tell Herod what they're up to. Herod calls the high priest, chief priests, and the scribes and Pharisees into his council and starts asking them about this king. And what do they tell him? They quote from the Old Testament, Micah 5:2. He's going to be born in Bethlehem of Judea. Now here they are trying to play this game of, oh yeah, we don't know where he's coming from. You guys aren't fooling anybody.
Verse 42, is that them?
Yeah. So then also, it continues in chapter 7, down to verse 40. Many of the people, therefore, when they had heard this saying, said, of a truth, this is the prophet. Others said, this is the Christ. But some said, shall Christ come out of Galilee? Now you see what they just did? They just flat out contradicted themselves once again. If you don't know where he's coming from, then where could he come from? He could come from Galilee. But the very fact that you're saying, oh, he's not supposed to come out of Galilee. Oh, so you know something now. All of a sudden, this knowledge is popping into your brain when you just first said, you don't know. You ask enough questions. You let a person talk long enough. And you'll catch them. Now, whether they'll catch it for themselves is another matter. So then they try to say, hath not the scripture said that Christ cometh of the seed of David and out of the town of Bethlehem where David was? Oh, so now all of a sudden you guys are remembering when before you didn't want to give an answer. It's all smoke and mirrors. It's all bait and switch. So, they're doing that here, John chapter 6. They'll continue to do that in John chapter 7. But as Reese said, it's all ad hominem attacks. It's personal attacks. You're not attacking what he's actually saying. You're just trying to attack him personally. I think it was Margaret Thatcher that said, when you're in a debate and all your enemy can do is attack you personally, you've won the debate. And that's what's going on here. Jesus is setting the scene on how it is that no one is able to answer him. So what they're trying to do, they'll try to say, okay, this is Joseph's son. No, he's not. You all know about his birth. This is God's son. But here they are trying to drag him down to their level instead of trying to ascend to his level. And that's the problem that every person has when it comes to Christianity. Christianity is a higher calling. It's a higher standard of life. And instead of trying to reach a higher standard, we have the tendency of trying to lower standards. Well, this is where I'm comfortable. So therefore, I want to try to have everything come down to me so that I don't have to change anything. But that's not what Christianity calls us to. Christianity calls us to be children of God, to be like Him. And just automatically that ought to establish in people's minds, okay, this is not going to allow me to stay the same.
Comfortable with being uncomfortable.
Yeah. You get that from you? Yeah. Is that Jocko?
Can I quote from Reese's?
Okay. So then verse 43, Jesus responds. Jesus therefore answered and said unto them, Murmur not among yourselves. No man can come to me except the Father which has sent me draw him, and I will raise him up at the last day. So once again, wrapped up in all of this is, why do we need this? Why are we needing to come to this? And it's because of this resurrection that's going to take place. It is written in the prophets, and they shall be all taught of God. Every man therefore that hath heard and hath learned of the Father cometh unto me. So here we are back in John chapter 1, establishing for us the foundation of what this book is going to be teaching us, in that not just that Jesus was sent to earth, but why Jesus was sent to earth. The Father sent him to draw them. And that very language, okay, no man come to me except the Father which has sent me draw him. What does that imply about the relationship of Israel to the Father?
They're not drawn. They're not attracted to.
They're not with him. If I have to draw you back in, that applies that you've wandered out somewhere. And there's the issue. There's part of the problem. Everybody wants to think that they're fine with God. But then once we start examining and we start inspecting fruit, what is it that we find of people? You're not even close. And that's the state of Israel. And instead of God just flat out judging them and wiping them out of the way, what does He do first?
Mercy.
Mercy. Go ahead, Jamie.
Wrapped up in that is He goes to them first because they have the promise, and He, through everything that they've done, is not giving up on them.
Okay.
Which goes back to the head of the
Right. Matthew 23. Yeah. Matthew 23, and gathering them under as a hen does her chicks. That's exactly right. He sends His Son. And that's okay. I'm here to draw you. And that all of this, so once again, so here they are making arguments without any type of evidence, without any type of logic. And Jesus in His argument goes back to Old Testament scriptures. That what is happening in front of them is a fulfillment of what the prophet, I believe it's Isaiah, actually stated. I'm still in chapter 7 in my Bible. 6:43, 43, 44, 45, right. Isaiah, also in Jeremiah, and there's hints of it in the book of Micah. And they missed this lesson in the miracle. Why is all of this happening? To draw you back to God. Just look at your system. Look at your religious system. Your whited sepulchres full of dead men's bones. What are you needing? You're needing to be revived. You're needing to be brought back to life. And that's what the Son of Man has come into the world to do. is to draw. And that Christ is this spiritual food that is drawing these people in. Here is God in their very presence, teaching them and drawing them. So what Isaiah and the other prophets were mentioning, it is written, the prophets, and they shall be all taught of God. That was literal. This is not figurative or metaphorical. But that in fact God would be in their very presence. Matthew 1, his name shall be called Emmanuel, which is interpreted,
God be with us.
God with us. Right in their midst, right in their face, teaching them, trying to draw. And they heard it, but they did not learn. They heard it all for themselves, firsthand, seeing these things laid out in front of them, but they would not come. So now you just think about how insulting all of this would be to a Jew, and especially to a Pharisee, to have to hear. I'm come for the purpose to draw you back to God. Oh, no. I'm close with God. And then reality has to set in. No, you're really not. You may be close in ritual. You may be close in these physical elements. But spiritually, you and God are not together. But once again, we have being presented to us in the efforts that go forth in trying to help people, in trying to teach what God is saying so as to draw people in and draw people together. What's our success rate going to look like?
3,002 billion.
Matthew chapter 7.
So Jordan said 3,000 contrasted out of 1 million, possibly 2 million people that you're trying to reach. Reese brought up Matthew chapter 7. And brethren, this is Jesus talking to these people. And I can just hear, so I'll just take some of the arguments that brethren try to use when they're not seeing the kind of success that they want to see. And it's just like, well, you just need to teach better. Well, are you going to say that of Jesus? Well, Jesus, you just need to teach better. And, possibly take out some of this insulting stuff that's going to hurt their egos. And that's going to hurt their feelings. It's not how it works. It's the old saying about leading a horse to water, but you just cannot make it drink.
Well, in addition,
No, go ahead.
in addition to Jesus saying all these things, we know the power of the religion, always references it and has too much focus on anything else. But it's his actions proving his word by them had all of that, and still the 3,000 to 1 million or whatever it was.
Yeah. And that it just, well, okay, yeah, we'll follow you for what you can give us physically. But as far as having to deal with this spiritual stuff, having to admit that you're the Son of God, just can't go that far. Now, what we have in this situation is a really good answer and a really good proof against those that would try to teach us today that, well, if a person's going to be saved, you need that Holy Spirit direct working so as to be able to convert a person and have them be saved. If Jesus cannot teach them and reach them, how's the Holy Spirit going to do any different? And we're being shown that that's not how this operates. All of this is putting the responsibility on them. Yeah, I'll draw you in, but it's your choice as to whether you're going to accept it and stay. It's your decision. that you're actually going to take these things in and be a follower or not. All we can do is plant the seed. And it is up to the heart, the mind, the intellect of the people that we're trying to reach to determine what they're going to do with it. In verse 46, Jesus continues the argument based upon his coming down from heaven for the purpose in which he came down to draw all men. In verse 46, once again, he states, not that any man has seen the Father, save he which is of God. There he's referencing himself once again. He hath seen the Father. Verily, verily, I say unto you, he that believeth on me hath everlasting life. I am that bread of life. So Jesus is laying all of this to rest. The arguments that are about to be brought up in the very next chapter, he's answering it before that even comes up. I am the Messiah. I am that prophet. I am the Christ. I am the true bread of life. And if you will believe on me, you will have everlasting life. And that all of this is being used, once again, to deal with their arguments. He's contrasting himself to what the type was in the Old Testament. Verse 49, your fathers did eat manna in the wilderness and are dead. God gave them that bread. But you know what? They ate that, they still died. It kept them alive physically, but it was teaching them a greater lesson that is repeated to that next generation in Deuteronomy 8. And the lesson that's being taught to them in Deuteronomy 8 is you must rely on God. Keep His statutes, keep His judgments, keep His law. And you will go into the land, you'll live, you'll multiply, you will be blessed. Verse 50, this is the bread which cometh down from heaven, that a man may eat thereof and not die. It's not talking about physically. Remember, this is all in the context of eternal life. I am the living bread which came down from heaven. If any man eat of this bread, he shall live forever. And the bread that I will give is my flesh, which I will give for the life of the world. So just as they had bread under the Old Testament system, we have bread today. We can eat all the bread, all that we want physically, but guess what? We're still going to die. And the question is, then what? And that's the question that still needs to be answered for today. Okay, we eat, we die. Then what? We have all these physical things, and then we die. Okay. But there's something after this. And in order to receive what is over in eternity, you have to meet certain requirements. You have to reach certain standards. And that's where it comes in about taking of this bread. The bread that I will give is my flesh, which I will give for the life of the world. What's the significance of that last part in verse 51? Okay? The whole world is involved in this. This is not just a Jewish thing. This is Jew, Gentile, and everybody in between. And that when we think about this from the standpoint of, okay, this is a universal offering, and for Him to say, the bread that I will give is my flesh, which I will give for the life of the world, what specific event is He foretelling about?
His death.
His death, His crucifixion. And when you're considering what he says here in verse 51 and what he's about to say, in continuation in just a moment, in this reference to of giving of my flesh. That's an old Hebrew, that's an old Israel saying that they all would have been picking up on. Oh, we know what it means to give of flesh. That's speaking of sacrifice. And so he's speaking of himself as giving himself as a sacrifice. So just imagine, as we're putting all of these things in line, if God provided for us our daily amount of food every day, just like he did for Israel, just like he did for Elijah, the widow and her son in 1 Kings chapter 17, who had the cruse of oil that never ran out, provided all of those things within the spiritual realm, but then never provided for our spiritual needs. Okay, we'd be full in our stomachs. But what would our lives be like? How would we be as just individual people living in the world?
Miserable.
We'd be just like Old Testament Israel. Murmuring, complaining the whole way through. And that just goes to show you can have everything the world holds physically and just still be a miserable person. And even for us as Christians, that can be us too. Here we are with all these spiritual blessings, and then we're still just miserable, mean people. And it comes back to just not taking those things in.
In our family studies this week, when Israel, the elders of Israel, came before Samuel and said, God, praise God. We go back to the spot with Jesus when he has crossed the sea and the people come after him and when he distanced himself from the one they can keep. They're at that level, that same level. They are rejecting God. They are only thinking physically, and as the people in Samuel say, they wanted this, just like with the ark, they wanted this talisman, this thing that's going to protect us. It's the same thing. They want this physical peace. It's all Jews were looking for in how they want to reestablish David and how that, and Jesus has to uplift them to the spiritual, and they're like, no.
Yeah. And then to think about all of the spiritual, miraculous events that are happening around them, as almost to the degree where it seems like it's almost like a daily basis, where something miraculous is happening, and you still can't pull yourself out of this physical, materialistic world. Now, with that in view, and then when you go through the 4 gospel accounts, and I can't remember the statistics on it or the percentages on it, but the majority of Jesus' sermons and his preaching deals with one topic. And we mentioned it in our Matthew study. Can you remember what it is?
Hell.
Nope. Well, it's mixed in there. So you're halfway right. But what is it that's going to send them to hell?
Action.
Okay, which sin? Okay, covetousness, materialism. Jesus is constantly on that topic. Now, you think about where we are today and just how materialistic our world is now. I mean, one of the most famous sayings that Jesus has about it is about it being easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than what?
Rich man.
Than for a rich man to enter into heaven. It's not impossible, but it's easier for this to happen than for this to happen. And you just look at our covetous, materialistic world that we are today. It's a struggle. And it's the one that, you know, a lot of our brethren really need to wake up to. And what it is that they're seeking to live for. And what they choose to, you know, consume their lives with. You got something rolling over there? You got something rolling in your brain? Well, you just seemed like you were really zoned in, so I wasn't sure if you're piecing something together or not.
I'm trying to piece together who you're talking about here.
No, I mean,
That's what I was going back and forth. I was like, is anyone here like that? And I was like, but if we're not, are we headed that way? So that's where I was. Is Micah like that? Is he talking to himself?
well, I mean, to a large, I mean,
10 chickens.
yes, I mean, to a large degree,
Really?
when we think about, what?
They're talking about your chickens.
Oh,
I thought he had 10.
no,
You lost more.
yeah, that was a long time ago.
Wow.
Go ahead.
A good gauge and a good test for us in that realm as to, you know, trying to find out just how covetous, materialistic we are. If it came to it, would I be willing to just walk away from the things that I have here? What are you smirking about?
You already did that.
Huh?
You already did that.
But just because I did it once doesn't mean I'll do it again. And that, you know, so that, but part of my makeup to where I would be in a position to where it is just like, okay, yeah, just sell stuff, throw stuff away so as to be able to do something else is because I saw my family do that twice. Which granted, the first time I was just a little kid, so I don't really remember all that was involved in it, but the first time my family went overseas, we didn't take anything with us. My mom and dad sold everything to go do mission work. And then when Dad decided to do it again in the early 2000s, sold everything again. And at that point, I was in my teenage years to where I remember it more vividly. And I can remember the stuff that we had, like just as a kid. Trampoline, we had dirt bikes, we had so we had a shed in our backyard that just had all kinds of toys and stuff in it that we were grown up with. I already had a small bench press in the basement and like all this kind of stuff, guns, and like we were into hunting and all that kind of stuff. We didn't put any of that in storage. Sold it. Sold the house. Sold everything. And went overseas. And that, in doing that, And even the next time, so like that most recent time in the early 2000s, moving overseas trying to do the mission work, and it just did not pan out. We only stayed there a year. But then we came back and just picked right back up. And that we were taken care of, we were provided for. So it is one of those situations of when is enough enough, but then also in looking at what we have, and that it's just okay, if I was called upon to do something that ended up taking me away from the United States to go and do something else for the kingdom in another area, would I leave? Or would I just be so attached to what's here to where it's just, nah, send somebody else? Or if we were being persecuted, would I be able to pack what I could to carry and just leave the rest? Most people don't think that way because we don't like to think about that kind of stuff. But if we're going to be prepared to do the kind of things that Jesus is wanting us to do, I mean, the call of a Christian is to deny yourself. Do we really do that today? Do we, though?
Learn that word as you have kids.
Oh, okay.
Yourself goes away.
Okay.
So that's the blessing of a child, I guess.
Okay. But very seldom do we, in our day and age, to where we've got all this stuff and we just say, no, I'm not going to do that. I don't need that, don't want that, don't have to have it. Something pops into our head and it's just like, yeah, I'm going to do that. So it's the same temptation, it's just packaged differently. Which is what we've already seen with this chapter in them trying to make Jesus king. Same temptation, just packaged differently. So no, I didn't have anybody specific in mind, but the application is there.
Because how do we balance it? Because then, everyone wants to go to, Abraham was rich, because then that gets you out of that.
Right.
comfortable mode,
Yeah.
Right? So how do we balance it to where, no, we're ready to leave? Because we're supposed to be, it's like, I don't want to die, but I'm ready to go, right? That's how we're supposed to live, right? I'm not ready for my kids' sake, my wife's sake, but I'm ready to go.
Yeah.
We all go at the same time right now. Jesus, take the wheel. But how do we balance this thing in that same area to where, yeah, I don't want to die, but I do? How do we balance it? Well, Abraham was rich, but yet we don't need to hold on to things.
Well, just with that statement, Abraham was rich, is that the full picture? Okay. Yeah, Abraham was rich, but did he live like rich people live today? Build a mansion, start a ranch.
He had a nice tent.
Well, but the fact is he lived in a tent. And he roamed from place to place. And what we actually end up finding out about his riches, was that really a blessing?
And he was willing to part with it too.
Okay, but you said no. How do we know? His blessings caused a problem.
Eberized.
Mm-mm.
Well, even with Lot, he allowed Lot to choose the greatest, which got him close to Sodom and Gomorrah, and that was a win for him.
Mm-hmm.
And Lot had the elders, the people chosen
Yep. But that's it. The herd is so great, and it caused a rift between Abraham and Lot and his servants. It's like, seriously? But then, yeah, so even though there is no record of anybody coming in and trying to steal from Abraham, that puts a target on your back, because people take what they can see. And here's this guy just roaming around in the wilderness, not attached to anybody, and he's got a lot of stuff.
Probably hired bodyguards.
So that causes a lot of concern. That causes a lot of alarm. In which we feel that today, locking our doors, and you go off on a trip, and what are you thinking about? Is my stuff okay at home? So you see, you always take that stuff with you, no matter where you go. So that's the element with Abraham, is that even though he was wealthy, he didn't live like it. He wasn't going around through Palestine, or not Palestine. He wasn't going around through the Promised Land buying up land everywhere that he went. He lived like a pilgrim. And so like that comes back to the lack of attachment to the physical things. And it's like, okay, we set up here for a little while, and God says, well, you got to go. Okay, pack up and go. But we built a well here. We planted a garden here. We did all these things here. Doesn't matter. You got to go. Okay. And that's so backwards from our Americanized view of what living the dream is. The dream is buying a house, setting up roots. Not necessarily for a Christian. I mean, God bless you if you can do that. But for most of our first century brethren, they couldn't do that. So yeah. Anything else?
Just thinking in this time era, you go online and what the majority of people are pushing is that it's okay to be obese, it's okay to be this, it's okay to be that, self-love, and just be who you're going to be, don't change. And notice how many people are miserable.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking of one person in particular, one of my friends, is of the world, loves the things of this world, but hates their life.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, even with that, so that's, you're talking about one of your friends, and that's good. But you're just taking it into an even larger realm, into the realm of Hollywood. Do you guys hear about the stuff going on with Lizzo right now? Some of you may not even know who she is, but she's a singer. But she is the pinnacle of what is being set as standard of happiness, beauty, who you want to be.
Jabba.
Right. And she put out a tweet yesterday that she's quitting the music business because she's so unhappy. What are you talking about? You get to travel the world. You've got millions of fans. You are unhappy? Yeah, because you're really not living to your full potential. Same goes for us spiritually. We may not be actually striving to reach our full potential when it comes to our spiritual life. And it makes us unhappy. And that, with this crowd right here, that's what they're being called to do. Okay, don't just get caught up on this physical. Remember that there's something spiritual and the value that it holds. And that the standard is actually higher than what's been presented to you. And all of a sudden, we don't like this. They get to murmuring, they get to complaining. So it's just like with that rich man, and we'll close on just two more slides, then we'll close. Luke 12:19, the rich man that had all these physical things and couldn't keep it in the barn that he had, so I'll tear down my barn and build bigger barns. And I'll say to my soul, soul, thou hast much goods laid up for many years. Take thine ease, eat, drink, and be merry. But then Jesus says that God says of that man, he was a fool. And not even thinking about how it was that his soul was going to be required of him that very night. So it's teaching them and us, you need more than just these physical elements. We need the bread of eternal life. And somebody's just like thinking about this man and the riches that he had in building bigger barns so as to store it. Why not dispense of it? Why not help those that are really in need of it? And there's another test of our level of covetousness. Are we stingy with the blessings that we have? Do we just store up for ourselves and then those that have a need and we don't dispense? I believe it's James that writes about it as we shut up our bowels of mercy. What you got? Oh. Oh. Yeah. But we have all these areas that test us on that. It's like, okay, yeah, we have been blessed with a lot. How do we use it? Just consume it on ourselves, or are we using it for the cause of the kingdom? Are we like our brethren in Acts chapter 1 through 4, to where they looked on the things that they had and said, this isn't ours. And so they were ready to give it, ready to dispense. So in realizing that our work is the same as Jesus' work, to open people's eyes so they can see. And in trying to get people to realize their need of this spiritual bread, and they just will not take it. And yeah. So this is the conversation you and I were having, was it last week or 2 weeks ago? Yeah. 2 weeks ago, about having people convert. And the struggle that it is to just have people to realize how much better life is if you will really give yourself to God. Now, there's a lot of people in our community that they say that. Oh, they like to think, oh yeah, I'm living for God, this, that, and whatever, the other. But yet we can't even get you to take one day out of your week to come and assemble like you're supposed to. And you say you're living for God. And even getting our own brethren to realize that they are not eating everything that God has to offer. And that most brethren are just getting crumbs and scraps of what Jesus is offering to give them, to truly be full and to eat of that bread and to live forever. to where most of our brethren they're trying to get the best out of both worlds. They're not fully committing to what's over here in the spiritual realm in Christianity, and they're still trying to go out here into the world to find fulfillment in different areas. And that's the very point Jesus made in Matthew 6 about trying to serve two masters. You cannot serve God and mammon, wealth, money, because the two do not dwell together, and they actually produce conflict. So just as we said, you would think, as we're trying to present this to individuals, that it'd be a stampede of people through the door. People climbing over each other just to try to get what it is that Jesus has. But we already have them murmuring. The Jews therefore strove among themselves, saying, "How can this man give us his flesh to eat?" The word strove is the middle voice of a primary verb, and it means to war, to quarrel, to dispute, fight, strive. To the point where they miss the whole thing. And this is showing that, even with them, the same thing can happen to us, that we get to discussing a thing and we end up losing sight of what it was that we were even talking about in the first place. And then we end up not understanding what we're even talking about. And it turns into a quarrel. It turns into the kind of debate that Paul says we're not supposed to be having in Romans chapter 1. And we get to the end of it and we start wondering, well, how did this even get started? And here they are, and now they're wanting to quibble and quarrel instead of just believing. And the question ends up arising, well, how can he even do that? How is this even possible that he would give us his flesh to eat? He just fed 5,000 people. And you're wanting to act like this is difficult? He turned water into wine. And all of a sudden we get here and it's just like, oh, this is impossible. But the problem that they're having is because of the view they have of Jesus. So just as we said maybe last week, 2 weeks ago, you can tell a person's inner thoughts the more they talk. How do we know how they really thought about Jesus and who he is? So we're making all these arguments about, okay, they don't believe he's the Son of God. And we have it right here in this text, the proof that they really did not believe he was the Son of God. He is the Son of God. Look at the question that they ask. How can this man give us his flesh to eat? Right there's your proof that they did not believe he is deity. That they're not seeing him properly. They said it themselves. It's out of their own mouths. How can this man? There's your problem. No man can do this. Can God do this? Absolutely, he can. John the Immerser, Jesus' cousin, that was a man. And the text tells us that. John chapter 1, there was a man sent by God whose name was John. But this, this is the Son of God. This is Emmanuel, God with us. And here's what starts that fighting. Here's what starts that quarreling. Is that very topic. It's not about the miracles. It's not about feeding the 5,000. It's about that right here. He just cannot be God. You want to do all these other wonderful things? Yeah, do that. But do not claim deity. Because in claiming deity, then that means they have to follow him. You need to do what he says. No, we don't want to do that. We like what we have. We like the system that we have now. Can't be satisfied with that. But sometimes we get caught up in the same problem of asking, well, how can this be done? So the point for us, just as it was for them, when God makes a promise to us, and even if that promise is based upon some conditions, we do not need to stumble at the how can it be possible. We also get sidetracked in trying to figure out the how. How does water baptism grant the remission of sins? I don't know. Well, what's the inner workings of it? What's the mechanisms of it? I don't know. I just know that God promised. If you'll believe and be baptized, you'll be saved. I don't have to know the how. Well, how is it that all the dead are going to be raised at the sound of his voice? I don't know. I just know that he promised it. But what we'll pick up with next time is we'll, like on this realm of how can this man give us his flesh to eat, and just how they're so desperately trying to find a way to discredit him that they're asking this question, but this idea of him giving of his flesh for them to eat, that is not a foreign idea. Like, this is not something so brand new that Jesus is teaching that it's just not going to make any sense to them. Oh, it makes sense. But it makes sense when you piece it all together. So as we think about ourselves and moving forward in these, in these classes and in these lessons, and even thinking about the struggle that's going on here, okay, like a long time ago? Okay. So so go ahead and just unhook that, and if you want to plug it up to the charger over here on this table. To where when we're thinking about the things that they're struggling with in their comprehension, it ought to give us some realm of peace that, okay, we're going to face similar struggles in our comprehension. But the last thing we need to have happen is what's happening here, where a murmuring and a complaining breaks out, and a striving, a warring ends up breaking out just because there's something that we don't understand. But then also being able to be at peace with the idea that, you know what, there's some things about this we're just not going to understand. How exactly Jesus walked on water? I don't know. I just know he did it. And just let that be that. But as was mentioned earlier in the class, it all comes back to the evidences that are found within the scriptures. Jesus pointed them back to, here's what the text says. And so take confidence in that. Rest assured in that. And what it is that we know to be true. So we'll stop there, verse 52, and they're murmuring and complaining and picking up on why it is they should have better understood what he was teaching. Any other thoughts? Questions? Yeah?
Have a small question. When we go back to verse 41, Jesus answered them, and when they're murmuring, are they murmuring out loud to where he hears them, or is he answering them because he knows what their thoughts are? Think about that. Because I know there's another spot where I believe it is in John where he answers the Jews, and I just wondered if this is another miraculous thing where he's perceiving and telling them what their thoughts are.
It could be, but in knowing how this chapter actually ends, I know a lot of people present it that way, but in knowing how this chapter ends and that, okay, this is being done in a synagogue, that I lean more the other way.
That they're just talking
Yeah.
out loud and
Yeah,
because it doesn't focus on that.
right.
I just wanted to know if we can know specifically.
I don't really know that we can know specifically, but like I said, it's a situation where it'd be fine either way. And so like with what we're saying in this passage, I'm not going to get bent out of shape if somebody wants to take a different viewpoint than what mine is, because both are fully plausible. And it's just one of those areas that, okay, the text doesn't really tell us specifically like it does in other places where like where just flat out says he was reading their thoughts. And it's like, okay, that's a dead giveaway for certain that, yeah, this is something miraculous. Huh? Okay. So
Just thinking about it in context of, how he performed these miracles and just yet again another situation where he's done something miraculous and they're just like, nope.
right.
You're the son of Jesus, or
Joseph, yeah. And so, yeah, so even though with it being in a synagogue, it could very well have been that they're just kind of off in a corner somewhere amongst themselves. But yeah, Jesus still knew what they're talking about. That's very plausible. Yeah. Okay. All right, so we'll stop. Take a break, and I'll work on that laptop some more to see if I can figure out what's going on.
Shut this off, or are you still recording?
It's done now. So yeah, go ahead and turn it off and turn